Hi, everybody. Welcome to the video and live streaming show. I'm John Lacey, and I'm joined, as always, by Sam Proof. Today, we're talking all about scenes and sources in OBS Studio. So we are going out live to all the various places. So make sure you let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Sam, how you going? How's your week been?
Good. I'm getting ready for we're going into spring break with the kids, and then Amanda and the kids are heading over to Michigan. I'm gonna buckle down the hatches and feed all the cats. How's things with you?
Yeah, things are going pretty good. I got a little mini display that I've set up in my teleprompter. So I've been playing around with all the equipment, very excited by all of it, but also trying to sort of, make sure my setup works. I'm kind of a creature of habit, so I don't want to change too much too quickly. But otherwise, I've been having a good week, so that's great.
Cool.
So again, just let us know where you're coming to us from in the chat. We'd love to hear that. But today we're talking all about OBS Studio and scenes and sources in OBS Studio. So I guess before we get started, we better talk about what OBS Studio actually is.
Yeah.
So it's free and open source software that you can download from obsproject.com. It's great for video recording, live streaming, and also even the hidden feature that not many people know about, but I think is really useful for most people, is actually the use of the virtual camera. So you can actually set up a scene, and then you can use computer that would use a webcam. So Microsoft Teams, Google Meet, Zoom, that kind of thing. And that's really, really useful because not only can you adjust how you appear on webcam, you can sort of incorporate branding elements such as colors and images and messages and things like that. So that's really, really useful. Sam, in terms of the things that we're talking about today, so we're going to be talking about scene collections, scenes, and sources. Can you maybe help unpack that for some of our audience?
Yeah. There's a lot of other parts of OBS that we'll talk about in future shows. I would want to also establish profiles is probably important to kind of get a basis on, which profiles just is all of your settings for one particular account, if you will. So like if I were doing Twitch, maybe that's its own profile. If I have like a restream thing, that might be its own profile. And now, so scenes, scene collections, and sources. Going from scenes is basically your layout. We're in a scene right now, right? Everything around us, all of these different elements, different cameras, audio sources, graphics. That is your scene. It is made up of multiple sources. So your sources are then video, audio, media of any kind, live camera feeds, game feeds, things like that, text on your screen, captions and whatnot. Those are all independent sources. So you put all those together to make one big scene, and you can have multiple sources per scene. Then you can have multiple scenes that do different things, and those become your scene collection. So again, similar to profiles, scene collection is like, this is the show. Like I would have a scene collection for the Sam Proof hanging out and chatting stream versus a different scene collection for Season Z, which is a board game interactive stream, which then would have like different cameras and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that is, I think, the basics that you need to know going into this.
Absolutely. And I guess, in terms of different scene collections, like I've got different scene collections for my day job, for my personal brands, for different shows, even different presentations, depending on how elaborate your presentation in a live setting will be. It could be very, very simple, in which case you could probably reuse the same scene collection over and over again. But if you do have like, a whole bunch of different things, it can become its own thing, its own scene collection. And that way you can actually, you can reuse it. But I guess some of the other things that are worth articulating too is in OBS Studio, if you go to the scene collection menu, we do have the ability to export and import your scenes.
Yes.
So if you've done a presentation and then maybe 3 months' time, somebody wants you to do that same presentation somewhere else, and maybe you need to use their equipment and their computer, you can certainly export those resources and have them ready to go, and bring them, and bring that presentation to a different audience via different technology potentially. So the scene collection, obviously, if you go to OBS where the scene collection menu is, we have options for creating a new scene collection, duplicating an existing scene collection, and that's really useful if you want to create a presentation and not start from scratch. I've obviously got the ability to rename or remove them, and import and export as well. There's also the opportunity to check for missing files, and I must admit, I'm sometimes guilty of saving all my resources onto Google Drive, and I have an app on Windows that sort of syncs Google Drive to my computer, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Right.
And I'll open up OBS and they'll be like, all your things are missing. And I'm like, oh, damn, I need to restart that application or restart my computer and go from there. But at least it sort of lets me know.
Yeah, I will say there's one caveat with exporting and importing, which is Mac and Windows handle OBS differently in some regards. So it may not be 100% helpful if you're going from one to the other with an export import. It'll definitely be useful, but it may not do everything.
And I guess, that's, I talk a lot on this show about having a content library, but I think it's worthwhile keeping all your resources together, whether you're, doing it within OBS or not, just so you can find them and reuse them. So that's definitely worth keeping in mind. So in terms of scenes, obviously the other thing in the scene collection menu that's worth mentioning is that you'll have a list of all your scenes. So if you want to switch between different ones, that's the place to do it. Let's talk a little bit about scenes themselves. So Sam, you've already sort of explained, everything on a given display, I guess, within our live streaming is considered our scene. Again, I must admit today we are coming to you via Restream Studio, so it's a little bit different to OBS, but essentially we have different elements here, and it's the scenes are about how you bring those things together. So what do we need to know about scenes?
Yeah, I mean, if we were to break down what this scene is and replicate it in OBS, that would be pretty easy. We've got, camera A over here, camera B over here. We've got a background color, BG color going on. And then down over here, we've got, this could either be an image source or a text source. This is actually pretty simple to put together. You put this together, and then 2 audio sources coming in. So you could put this together in like a minute, 2 minutes, in OBS once you've got your your feet on the ground, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So, the thing that you really need to know about creating scenes is you want to kind of have this concept of your scene before you start building it. Like, I would sketch it out, I would do storyboards, figure out all the different scenes you want to do. Like you may, want to have a full screen of just your camera. You may, if you're a gamer, do a full screen of the game, or a full screen of the game with a picture of you in the bottom right, bottom left. Have all these established. When I approach OBS these days, I look at all of the things, all of the scenes I want to make, and then I think, what's true of every single scene? I do a lot of more interactive things that a lot of your Twitch streamers might do, which involve a lot of alerts and overlays. And I don't want to have 30 different sources in every single scene, because then if I have to find something, I have to scroll through 30 different sources to be like, where was that thing? So if I'm going to do all of these alerts and overlays, and I do have a bunch of them from a various amount of sort, like there's Streamlabs, there's several from my Mix It Up bot, there's Batisimo, there's Stream Elements, there's a bunch of different alerts that I have. So I have one scene that is overlays. Those are all in there. And then I embed that scene into all of my other scenes at the top of that scene. So it is nested and it just works. I don't have to worry about moving any of the elements around. They're all the same on every single scene. So that's something, and even your audio source, if you're going to have a dedicated mic, which I think a majority of streamers are a solo operation, they're just going to have that one mic. You can nest that in that overlay scene and not worry about it again. So it doesn't switch off when you accidentally forgot to add it to gameplay with Pip, you know?
Mm-hmm. So there's a few things to unpack there. I guess and this is the thing that we talk about a lot on this show, is that obviously OBS Studio it's free and open source. It's incredibly powerful. It's this amazing thing. But I guess the thing that I try to tell, especially beginners, is that you don't need to know all the settings and all the features. And just a little bit of a shameless plug for something that I've done on my other show, the Coffee and Content, is the OBS Studio Challenge. And I try to keep it really, really simple to just bring people into OBS Studio. And all we do there is we add our web camera, we add some graphics, we might add some text. That's literally it. And we use the virtual camera to try that out with a friend. And it's just a very, very gentle introduction to OBS Studio. But I guess to get more, and in that context with the virtual camera, you don't even need to worry about the audio sources. So I think in some ways that makes it easier for the typical beginner. But I guess the other thing too that you alluded to there was that it is possible, and we'll talk about specific sources in a second, but it is possible to bring in, your audio as its own device, but it can also be attached to a camera. So in some ways, you need to think critically about how you combine those things, because as you say, if I move to a screen share scene and I've turned my camera off and my audio is coming through with my camera, then you won't be able to hear me. I should say too that if you have, and that's a perfectly legitimate way of doing it, but if you do, just make sure you're underneath the thing that you're sharing in the stack, because once basically when you get to your scene, you'll have your sources in a list, and the one that's on top of the list at the very beginning will be on top of the screen visually. So I mean, just keep that in mind. There are a lot of different ways of doing things, and even my setup within OBS Studio, like I use the ASIO audio plugins for OBS, which lets me bring in different channels from my Rodecaster Pro. And that's really useful and great for me. But again, I have to be very careful that I've included all the various audio sources in all the places I want to use them. Right. So again, it can be incredibly powerful, but you do need to think it through. And I love the idea that you've presented about actually going away and thinking maybe on a piece of paper about what your scene should look like.
Yeah, I think that's, always a good way to start things, because if you just open OBS and go, what am I doing? And if you haven't just been using OBS for a decade, you're just going to sit there and it's basically like spilling ink on a paper and being like, I'm drawing something, or I'm writing a novel. I'm not sure yet. Like, go into it with some kind of goal and a structure that you had in mind, I think is the best way to do it. I wanted to say that, so both sources and scenes have obviously sort of an order to them. It only matters on the sources side, what is on top and what is on bottom. As far as scenes go, that's just there to organize for you. But yeah, if you're familiar with any of pretty much all of the Adobe products, layers work very similar in OBS as they do in like Photoshop, where the top one is the one that is the most visible. So if John puts his arm under his logo over here, it would be under that. So that is
I don't think my camera actually goes that far.
You can't actually go over that far. But yeah, his hand would be under that. That is the top layer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess we'll talk about sources in a moment, but I mean that's a really great point, because we can bring images into OBS as sources, and OBS actually does support graphics formats that do support transparency. So you literally can put yourself in the action. Again, I'm not really going to do it for today's discussion, but it's not uncommon, especially on my other show, for me to share my screen and just to be in the corner. And because I do also have the benefit of having the green screen feature, a physical green screen behind me, and the chroma key filter, within OBS Studio that literally puts me
Yeah.
inside the action, which can be really, really useful. But let's talk about scenes before we jump into the sources.
Mhm.
Obviously, you can have as many or as few scenes as you want. And
Yes.
again, I sort of spoke about for the beginners, we just start with that single scene and we work up to more things. And this is, I mean, this is true of anything in life. It can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be.
Yes.
But I think it's really important to think about what you actually name these scenes so you can
Yes.
recognize them from a list.
Yes.
But also just putting them in a sequence that makes sense. And, you know, I will have a very particular running order for my scenes in my other show where I have my introduction, a thumbnail, which is animation, I'll start talking about, and then I'll switch over to my screen share. And, you know, we'll just go through that way. And again, we'll talk about how we can switch between those things a little bit easier moving forward. But again, just think about the order, think about the naming conventions there, because you need to know, like, you don't actually have to name anything really in OBS Studio, but it will help you enormously if you do and you make it descriptive.
Yeah, I mean, scene 1 and scene 2 are going to be default named for you, but that doesn't mean anything. So just to give a sense, like for my own normal, just sort of chatting, my sort of top rotation, I actually have about 20 scenes in this project, plus a bunch that are old scenes, but the ones that I actually use. So it starts with record only, which is just a big full screen shot of me that's used for things like this camera right now, or just recording in general. Next is pre-FS. FS is full screen, and that is a for pre-show. So that I'll have like my counter on it and things like that, music, whatever. Full screen is the next one. Reaction, which is big screen of a media and little me in a pip. And then it gets into some more specific things because I do some very specific segments, like King of the Hill full screen, which is a game that I run, Magic the Gathering, content class. These are all very show specific at that point. But that's, I think, a good basis to get people going. And then, of course, I have my overlay and my credit scenes, which are other scenes that are nested inside of the main scenes.
And I guess just another thing I might recommend too is that OBS does have a learning curve, and you will learn things over time. And it can be so great to actually just go to scene collection, create a new scene collection, and start from scratch periodically, because you'll realize there are things that you just tried and that maybe they didn't work for you, but maybe you've only hidden that source, you didn't actually delete it. So it's I really, it's bizarre how much I enjoyed sort of doing a bit of a spring clean of my scenes and sources in that sense. But let's actually talk a little bit about what those sources are. So there's a huge list of them, and I'm actually writing a bit of a blog article about this, and you can check it out at johnlacey.com a little bit later on. I'm going to just rattle them off really, really quickly, and then we can talk about some of the ones that we use. So we've got the audio, the application audio capture. So that's to grab sound from a specific application on your computer. We've got the audio input capture, the audio output capture, the browser, a color source, display capture. We've got the image, an image slideshow, the media source is another option there. We've got the ability to nest other scenes within our scene. We've also got, text. We've got a VLC video source. We've got the video capture device, and that's for bringing in your camera. And we've also got the window capture as well. So essentially, we've got all these different elements that we can sort of play with in terms of bringing different things physically onto the screen or into the audio stream. I must admit, there are some things in that list that I've never used. And I was mentioning to Sam before the show, I've never actually used the game capture, for example, because I'm not really much of a gamer. But I'm curious, Sam, what are the ones that you tend to use a lot and that you really like?
So, I mean, obviously we use the video capture and audio input capture. I also have never used, I've maybe used game capture once for Mob Crush or something like that. I do tend to use like text, and I've obviously used the nested scene feature. And someone, I'll do media source and image or image slideshow, and then I do a lot of either display or window capture, depending on what I'm trying to capture. So yeah, typically when I'm doing like gameplay, it is like a window capture where I'm just grabbing that entire monitor because I've got 4.
Yeah, and I guess like that's probably worth unpacking. So the window capture will literally capture a single application on your computer,
Yeah.
whereas the display capture will capture everything on a screen.
Yes.
You can still sort of zoom in and crop and do different things in terms of what you actually show on that screen, but it's often a really good way of sharing your screen. Hello, everybody in the chat. By the way, I haven't really been acknowledging the chat as much as I would like to, but it's great to see so many people out there. Hi, Bernhard. Forgive me, but I don't know how to pronounce this name, Sam. I don't know if this is a friend of yours.
That's just Claire.
Love cats. Okay, just Claire. All right, awesome. Yeah. Garen Belaney popped in to say he was Team OBS, which we love as well. And
what's up, Garen?
Add another friend of yours from
CG.
Twitch.
Yeah.
Yes, awesome. So again, thank you for joining us. This is the video and live streaming show. I'm John Lacey and I'm joined by Sam Proof. Today we're talking all about OBS Studio and scenes and sources specifically. So we're talking about the different sources that we can bring into our scenes. And, I must admit, I really, and it's funny, we've spoken about this recently, but obviously OBS Studio is a very powerful piece of software, and it's a great way of bringing things together. But obviously, I personally only use a handful of features, but I find them so amazing that I just use them over and over again. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I've got my video camera, I've got my audio source. With my video camera, I'm actually go into the filters and use that green screen chroma key effect to remove the background so I can bring in other things if I need to. I've got, I don't use a lot of text actually, funnily enough. I like to design the text as graphic and just bring it in. But I've certainly got images, and even on my my day job, I sort of designed a handful of different background images for my team, and they sort of use a virtual background option within Microsoft Teams. But I actually brought all 5 or 6 of them in with the image slideshow, and it just very slowly fades between each one over and over again. And it's funny, they're kind of similar, so people don't notice it all the time. It's a very subtle effect, but every now and then they'll go, "Oh my God, how did you do that?" And then that's sort of a great excuse for me to talk about OBS Studio in the way that I love to talk about it. So that's great. I guess another one, the color source is just a really great way of bringing in a block of color. And there is also a gradients plugin that will let you do a similar thing, but with a gradient instead of a solid color. So these really are sort of just building blocks, either visually or audibly, and you can just bring them in. And I guess that's the other thing I would encourage people to do is go into OBS, go to the scene collections, create a dummy scene where you can just have a play, like not even something that you'll use, but just experiment with all the different features. Right. One of the other things I do on my other show is that I use the Ninja Chat script to bring in chat messages into OBS Studio, and we actually use the browser display capture to bring that onto what my video that I'm sharing as part of that scene. I mean, there's so many things you can do, and again, I like to remind people constantly that the image, the ability to bring those images in, they do support all kinds of different file formats, and they do support transparency. So it's a really, really cool way of doing things. Yeah. And you can literally, I've often designed things in Photoshop and Illustrator, and I'll just export each part of that individually. Yes. So even, I usually have a gray bar on my scene. So I've got the gray bar, the logo, and the background, all as different things, and I can sort of turn those on and off as I need them.
Yeah, I wanted to say along those lines, for Christmas on the Cute Avalanche channel, we did a Christmas tree with a cat face, and and a bunch of different lights, and the lights were like 5 different colors. Like you could turn them to blue or white or yellow, and you could switch between all of the cat faces by doing different emojis in the thing. And those are all separate sources. So we drew them all in Photoshop thanks to Insomnia Doodles, exported each one, and then imported that as a scene inside of OBS with all of those different sources. And then just a chat bot would turn on or off whatever source needed to be. So yeah, you can do some really complicated things.
And even with the image slideshow, another tip that I like to give people is that you can actually just imagine you've got different banners for, it could be for literally anything, but maybe, you know, you're letting people know all the different social media platforms you're on. Maybe you're letting them about different products. You can bring those into a list of images that it pulls upon, but you can also actually use a completely blank GIF file or PNG file and just actually let it just automatically go through those at different time intervals. So you'll just have something flash up on the screen, it'll go away, then something else will come back on. And you can do that as often as you want to. And again, I guess the other thing too that's worth talking about is beside all of these sources, we have the ability to actually hit the little icon and turn them on and off. So if I wanted to, I could, and in fact, I'll do this as an example right now. If I click this little icon here, you'll see that the logo that was in the corner of my screen has disappeared. I know it's a fairly trivial example, but you know, that's a very easy thing to do. You can also lock layers. So if your scene is getting a little bit more complicated, and you want to make an adjustment to something and you have to click through a whole bunch of different sources before you can actually grab onto it, you can lock all the other ones that you don't want to move around. I should really do that with my chat as I think about that, actually, because that's something that I accidentally move all the time. So that's another good way of working with those things. So again, if you do go to obsproject.com, they do have the ability to extend the functionality of OBS with plugins, many of which will bring in their own sources. I sort of mentioned that gradients one a moment ago. But there are all kinds of things out there. And again, it just depends on what your goals are.
Yeah, and along the lines of locking, you can also select multiple sources and group them so they become sort of a folder within all of those other sources. So then you can move that entire group as one unit. And again, you can turn on and off the entire, or hide and make visible the entire group at one time. So that's really useful as well.
Absolutely. So that is really good, and especially if you've got a couple of different elements that relate to each other that you may want to toggle on and off. So again, getting back to the OBS Studio challenge, if you've got your product image, if you've got a little bit of text around it and maybe a background, if you bring all those things together, just pick them from the list. Actually, I think hold down the Control key as you select multiple sources, and then you can right click and go to group selected items. And that way, you could, as Sam says, it combines them as a folder, and then you can turn that folder on or off. And that can be a really great way of working. Again, it depends on how simple or elaborate your particular scenes are, but it's certainly something that can be incredibly useful.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the video and live streaming show. I'm John Lacey, and I'm joined as always by Sam Proof. Today we're talking all about OBS Studio and specifically scenes and sources within OBS Studio. And we've spoken a little bit about the different scene collections that we can work with, how we can actually work with scenes themselves, and some of our favorite sources. There are obviously a lot more that you can unpack. And again, if you've got questions about specific ones, let us know in the chat. We'd love to address some of that. But I guess let's talk about actually switching between the scenes, Sam, because there are a number of different ways that we can do this, and some are very fun and nerdy. Some of them are pretty straightforward.
Sure.
I guess, you know, the most simple way to switch between a scene is just click on it from the list.
Yeah.
And you know, it's an easy enough thing to do. But I guess maybe before we go any further, can you talk to us about studio mode? Because I don't think everyone knows what that is just yet.
Sure. So when you first open OBS, you're just going to have one big block, kind of like if you just saw the me and not the John on this scene, it would just be like that. Studio mode, this would be called program, and studio mode would flip you to a second sort of similar looking setup that is your preview mode. So if you think of this as your live monitor, and assuming John was just another, whatever my scene was, as the preview monitor, you could have on the ready the next scene that you wanted to go to. And then you would just, hit the transition button when you're ready to make that switch. So this is, for more high polished production type feel. You're like in the production room, and you're like, ready 5, and on 3, 2, 1, make the switch. Like that kind of feel. Yeah, you're not.
And I guess
out loud like that. But
yeah.
Go on.
and you make actually you got to produce about studio mode specifically is that you can make changes to the scene before you switch to it. So if and I won't say that I'm guilty of this, but I am totally guilty of this, that maybe I've made an adjustment, maybe I've accidentally bumped my camera, and it's fine on one scene that I'm displaying on, but I go to move to my other scene where I'm sharing my screen and I'm just in the corner, and maybe I haven't cut out enough of the backgrounds or whatever it can be. I can literally go into studio mode and I can make that change. I mean, it is a little bit more difficult when you're one person making that change and talking to the camera at the same time, but it's certainly possible.
Yeah.
So that's,
I was going to say, and for the most part, if like you notice something that's on your screen live that's messed up, you could open up studio mode, have the preview going, and even be in the same scene, like scene one, and like, oh no, this watermark is supposed to be on the other side of the screen. You can drag it over without people seeing that drag, and then just make the transition, and it pops into place. There are some exceptions to that when you start working with nested scenes.
Sure. Yeah, so studio mode is another way. I guess maybe I'll get Sam to talk about this, but we know on this show we're very fond of things like the Stream Deck, so that's another way of switching between scenes. Sam, so did you want to speak to what we can do in terms of using the Stream Deck?
Yeah, so Stream Deck and OBS are like peanut butter and chocolate. They are just perfectly in tune with each other. You can control almost like all of your sources, all of your scenes. You can program them to on your Stream Deck, so you can make some pretty happen if you wanted to. The Stream Deck will do more than just one thing per button push. But just to get, you have those 3 scenes, whole screen, your day, and your gameplay with the picture, the button on your Stream Deck, and easily switch between them without having to do studio mode, without worrying about all of that stuff. You can, assign your name of that you have for the scenes to each of those buttons. You can even put a screenshot of that scene in the button, which I will show. So just between them, you can bring on and off different assets and sources through different buttons as well. So like, that you want this watermark to only be on occasionally, you can have a button that toggles that on and off. You could even have a button that, like, when I go into gameplay, it toggles it off as well. But when I go back to full screen, it's going to put it back on. So you can do a wide variety of things with Stream Deck to OBS.
Absolutely, and we've done an entire episode on the Stream Deck, and we love it, honestly. Elgato, thank you for that alone. I do use some other Elgato equipment, but and I should say that none of this is sponsored content. We just really appreciate how easy this makes our lives be. It could be, yes. I mean, get in touch by all means if you're out there watching. We'd love to hear from you. But I guess the other thing is, if you don't have a Stream Deck yet, another way that you can actually switch between the scenes is to actually go into the file menu and go to settings and actually set up some keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah.
So do you have any thoughts? I guess you probably don't do a lot of that, given that you do have access to the Stream Deck. But do you have any thoughts on that specifically, Sam?
I do use a few hotkeys, but they are also then tied into a chatbot that controls them, so I don't have to know them. But yeah, I do have setting up those hotkeys. Obviously, before you sure you're not doing something is going to override a hotkey. Accidentally figured out, oh damn, I needed things. What was open, and you know it will warn you when you've used a hotkey that you in OBS, but sometimes you want that. Like sometimes you want, I don't have a Stream Deck. I'm going to make the same hotkey that goes to my game scene be the one that toggles the watermark. So you can do that kind of thing. You can also do something more complicated by then using those hotkeys and tying them into a chatbot like Mix It Up. So Mix It Up, in a similar fashion, we'll use a the WebSocket in OBS. You don't need to know what that is at this time. It will make a connection to the WebSocket, and it will let you turn on and off different scenes, different sources. It'll let you switch scenes. This is where it gets really fun, and the reason why I tend to not use images for text and actually just text is I can create text on screen, use a chat bot. If I save that text, if I pull that text from a file, I can use this text bot to dynamically update that text. So if I have different messages from my audience that I want to go over in the chat at some point, I can just have like a button set up and on the Stream Deck that controls the chat bot, that then updates this with the next message in a file that has been created dynamically. So you can do some amazingly complicated things in that fashion.
And it's funny, I kind of think this is why our show works well, because Sam is always going for the incredibly nerdy, complicated things, and I'm like, let's talk to the beginners again, Sam. Let's go back a step.
You can switch scenes really easily with a hotkey.
Yes, there is that too. So I mean, obviously there are lots of different ways of doing it. It just depends on what you've got access to and what's most comfortable for you. Again, it's, even if you do have to just use the mouse and click on it, it's obviously not a difficult thing. There is something nice about just being able to hit the buttons. And I should say too that I kind of mentioned earlier that I do have a very particular running order that I do my other show in. And I literally, I don't know, you probably can't see it terribly well from here, but like I will literally have the top row of my icons. The first one is the start sequence. The second one is just me on camera. The third one is the screen share with me in the corner. The fourth one is screen share only, and the last one is sort of the thanks and end title screen. So not only do I have those there, I usually have them in sequence, and sometimes I will actually repeat them just so I can keep going. Okay, I'm up to here, just press the next button, and that way I don't have to think too much about what I'm doing while I'm doing it, because I've sort of unpacked some of that before we got started. So yeah, that's really, really useful.
The real beauty of the Stream Deck is eventually you're just going to be flying blind on it. Like it's only, I mean, you've got the big one, but if you've got just the standard one, it's just 5 keys. Eventually you're just going to have that muscle memory of like, boom, and I just know where every single thing is, you know.
Absolutely. So this is the video and live streaming show. I'm John Lacey, and I'm joined as always by Sam Proof. Today we're talking all about OBS Studio and really working with scenes and sources in OBS, and all the different ways that we can sort of bring these things together. I guess, Sam, it's funny. Some weeks we can talk for 3 hours, and other times we get through our content really, really quickly. So I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to speak about that we haven't already addressed, but
sure. No, I do think that, there's a ton of other things to talk about in OBS, but specifically in your sources, I think we didn't really go into. There's a bunch of filters and things that you can do on top of pretty much anything audio or visual related. So you can add filters. if you have any semblance of an idea of how audio works. I don't. You can do things like add gain or a noise gate or compressor, expander, things like that, which I highly, if you don't have the best equipment in the world out there and you think you can handle the audio stuff, I highly recommend watching some videos on and figuring those things out, because that definitely will improve if you're just running through like a regular webcam. For video and images, you can do a bunch of things like, John mentioned chroma key earlier. That's something you do through those filters. You could do some color correction. You can do, if you're like a professional photographer, it's got like, LUT applications and things like that. You can take things like your text and add like a scroll to it, so it's kind of got that news ticker feel, and things like that. And gosh, there's probably more things, but yeah, I think that's a good start.
Sure. I
Yeah.
guess the other thing is that we haven't mentioned, and I didn't even have my list to mention, but it might be worth mentioning now, is that one of the things I love about OBS Studio specifically is that you've got different options in terms of the transitions between scenes. And we've actually got the ability to cut or fade sort of by default between
Yes.
different scenes, but you also have one of Sam's favorite plugins, which is the Move plugin, which
Yeah.
you can literally duplicate a scene and you can move everything around, and when you go between those two scenes, they will very sort of slowly morph between those two things. And it's like, to be honest, I only sort of use the cut and the fade for most things, and the fade is so beautiful, given that it's something that you don't even need to worry about. Like, it's such a nice transition. And again, like, as I say, when I'm doing my other show, I will literally just hit a button on Stream Deck. It will fade me into the next scene. It is so effortless, and it actually looks really, really professional on screen. And again, this is from completely free and open source software that's available for Windows, Mac and Linux. It's funny. WordPress and OBS Studio are sort of the two beacons I hold as great examples of open source software. A lot of open source software isn't this good, but certainly those two things are very, very useful, and I do really appreciate all the work from the developers that have gone into those things.
Yeah, I would say with the transitions, like, yes, you can do some really cool things. You can get custom stingers made that are really slick and put them in. For like a few programs, like programs that I do, I actually do use a fade to color for like the zombie show. It'll flash to red really quick in between transitions, which is, jarring and expected effect. But the one thing I wanted to say is because of the fade on OBS, I've always wanted a Stream Deck that had the T-bar, so you could just be like, or even just halfway, and you're like, oh, it's half. No, I'm just kidding. Pay attention, Elgato.
I mean, there is, and I'm sort of blanking on the name of the device, but there is sort of a vision switcher device that I know a lot of people do use. It's profound overkill for what I do, but I mean, I just like it. It's especially if you've done a bit of video editing, that we can sort of just fade between scenes as effortlessly as we can in OBS it's just amazing, and it's really cool. And like I said, it's really nothing to do with me. I don't even have to think about it. It just sort of happens. But it is, if you watch that video back, it is so beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. I think another, first off, you can add filters to your scenes as well as sources, which is good to know. And you mentioned the Move plugin. There's also a Motion plugin, which basically takes everything we said off the table, and you just build one scene, and you just have all these elements that just move around within the scene. So forget everything and do that. No, I have thought about doing that, and I was like, I'd rather do it a little bit, so I have a lot more control. I don't know. I feel like it's too much. But the one thing I wanted to say is you can also project, if you do have the luxury of multiple monitors, and you're trying to lay out like really specific elements on your screen, you do have the ability to project like your entire scene to another monitor, and then you can like get it really close up, because OBS is, you know, a lot of stuff going on. You get this little window to play with, kind of like we are right now. So if you need to do some nuanced nudging, that's a good, you know, feature to play with. You can also go into the individual elements of the individual sources, excuse me, and you go into transform. There's a whole lot of very effective things there, like center to screen, or center vertically, center horizontally, to give you some sort of quick alignments. Fit to screen, if you want to keep your aspect ratio, or stretch to screen if you don't care about that. Yeah, don't play with that so much. You can flip things vertically, horizontally, rotate them, and things like that. But there is also edit transform, which lets you just straight out put in exact number placements for how big you want it, what your XY is, and where it's going to show up, and all those sort of things. So you can get very specific about source placement in your scene.
Absolutely, and it's funny because a lot of those options are only available to you in that right click menu. Like then I sort of expect to see them elsewhere, but a lot of them really just exist in that one particular context. So by all means, right click on your source in that screen and actually check out all the options, because there are so many of them. I do love the ability to, because I guess that's the other thing that's worth unpacking, is that OBS Studio is built in a docking sort of way. So I've essentially got three displays here. I've got the one that's on my teleprompter. I've got another one to my left and one on the right. If I was working exclusively in OBS Studio, I could have my display on one of them and I could have my chat on another one. It just really depends on how you want to work. So, I mean, that's... And I love that flexibility. And today we're talking to you via Restream Studio, and I love the simplicity of Restream Studio, but I certainly don't have the same ability to customize where things go. They all sort of exist within the browser, and I can't split up that browser scene. And given that I've got this new mini display that is part of my teleprompter setup, I've even sort of increasing the size of that particular tab in my browser. Certain features sort of disappear if I zoom in too much. So you've got to sort of keep those sort of things in mind. But again, I guess the thing that I like to remind everybody is OBS is very, very powerful. And, you know, there is a bit of a trade-off in terms of simplicity versus flexibility. And again, just keep in mind, you don't need to know all the settings. You don't need to try all of the things to get started. And again, I think it is quite a useful thing to add to your content creation toolkit. So this is the video and live streaming show. My name's John Lacey, and I'm joined by Sam Proof. Today we're talking all about OBS Studio and how to actually work with scenes and sources in OBS. We've spoken about the different scene collections that we can actually use. And again, you might want to use those for different projects or different businesses or products or even different presentations, depending on how elaborate your scenes and sources are. You've got the ability to create new scenes, duplicate scenes, remove existing scenes, rename them. You've also got the ability to export and import those things. So if you're switching between computers, for example, that can be quite useful. But as Sam mentioned earlier, just keep in mind there may be some issues if you're moving between platforms, like from Mac to Windows or vice versa. So keep that in mind. But it's certainly a great way of working with those things. Okay, so I guess, Sam, and again, I know you like to go nerdy, and I like to come back to the beginners. And I think we complement each other brilliantly in that sense. But if you did have somebody that was just starting with OBS today, what would your advice be?
I mean, start simple, like 2 or 3 scenes. You're gonna want a close up, you know, a full screen of your webcam, and you know, one with whatever your talking point is, whether it's a media thing, a guest, or a game. You know, that's all you really need. Make sure you have your video and your audio on all of those, and then start streaming.
Nice. And again, like I in some ways, I probably would want to make it even easier on you if you're not actually streaming. If you're just using it for that
Sure.
virtual camera feature, you can literally just start with one. Just get your webcam in there, add an image, maybe a little bit of text, and just, you know, once you start playing with this, and again, whether you've been using OBS for years or whether you're just starting, create a new scene collection that is just for experimentation. Try out all the features, all the fun things. And I guess, you know, Sam sort of mentions the marquee scrolling text, and like there's all kinds of weird, wonderful things you can do. To be really honest with you, I'm very much a minimalist when it comes to design. I don't want all the flashing things and all the colors. I really want something a little bit more coherent than that. So I would say play with those, get that out of your system, and then leave a lot of them to the side and just think about what you're doing. And because really we want to make sure that what you're doing on screen complements your message and doesn't distract from what you're doing. I know there are a lot of platforms that do a lot of fun little animations, and I think that's great, but I don't go and watch that person for fun animations. Even, you know, I sort of have this web design and development background, and there was a time when every website had to be parallax, and, you know, I had to have, as you scroll down the page, things would fly in from either side, and that's really fun for the first time you look at it, but the second time you're like, I'm kind of over it and I just wanted the information on this page. So again, don't get too carried away, but certainly explore the options and think critically about how you want to use those. And again, I love that idea that you mentioned earlier, Sam, about actually sketching some of this out on paper, because I think and again, simplicity is a good way to start. You know, there is a reason why, you know, even in our sort of horizontal video shots, we're dead center. And that's in part because that is a really great way of repurposing this content if we did want to move to a square format or a vertical format. So don't get too carried away. Just make sure that what you're doing actually works for your project, and just give it a go. Like I said, it's absolutely free. It's literally free. If you spend a lot of money on equipment, knowing that the software is free is really, really nice. So you can head over to obsproject.com and download it and give it a go. And if you do have OBS projects, if you do have OBS questions, I should say, make sure you let us know what they are, because we'd love to cover those in future shows and other content.
Yeah, definitely.
So
I will say one thing before you go, and one thing about OBS, when you are getting ready to stream, and OBS is like, hey, there's an update. Don't update it. Wait until after that stream. So many times, myself and other streamers have been like, this will take 5 minutes. And then suddenly nothing works. Not that that happens often, but it's been enough that I'm like, I'm apprehensive about any future updates.
And yeah, I mean, we've joked about this before, but it's hilarious to me how often like an hour before we come to do this show, my computer wants to install Windows 11, and I'm like, no, not now, not now. Maybe somewhere down the track, but we're definitely not doing that today. Yeah, I guess that is worth mentioning too. So yeah, if something works for you, make sure you have a compelling reason before you make a change or an upgrade. But yes, as we say, there's so much good stuff that we can sort of unpack in terms of the OBS, and really any other subjects that you'd like to hear a little bit more about. So I just want to address this comment before we wrap up. So Bernhard writes, it's a pity that the initial learning curve to start using OBS is too steep. And I think that is fair. I think the feedback that I've been receiving a lot is people are really quite scared of OBS. And I think what I'm trying to do is sort of make it a little bit more accessible. So if there are specific things that we need to unpack, please let us know what those are. And, you know, we will certainly address some of those things in future shows, because I know it can be quite daunting, and as we say, it is quite powerful. I guess the thing I want you to do is not focus on all the features, just pick out the couple that you need. And I guess really my recommendation, and I'll make some more content about this in coming weeks, because I think it is it's really important that we get more people on board with OBS Studio. But I think we need to look at our settings in terms of recording and streaming. I think that would be a really great thing to get started, and then just sort of creating those first initial scenes. And we would have liked to have done a little bit more screen share with you than we were able to today for various reasons that I won't actually get into right now. But those are certainly things that we'll try and unpack in coming weeks. So Bernhard and others, if you do have questions, please hit me up or mention it to Sam, or just leave a comment wherever you happen to be watching it. Because we really, I know there is that initial thing to get over, and we definitely do want to acknowledge that and help you through that.
You know what? I think I could totally just make a scene collection that is like those 3 essential scenes that I was talking about earlier, with just those very basic sources, export it, and like host that on my website so people could just have that starting point. So I'll see if I can't make that happen this week, because family's going on vacation without me, so I have time. Making a note.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. So yeah. And again, thank you for joining us in the chat today. It's been great to see so much chatter in there. Again, we realize OBS can seem like a daunting thing, and we'll try and unpack that over the coming months. But again, if you've got specific questions, certainly let us know. So Sam, where can people learn more about you and watch your content and all those good things?
Yeah, you can find me as Sam Proof on just about everything except TikTok, where I'm official Sam Proof. But for all of those links, head over to samproof.tv, and I'll catch you there.
Absolutely. And if you want to catch up with anything that I'm doing, you can head over to johnlacey.com. I've got all the links to all the places and the social things over there, so you can check that out. Next week on the show, we're actually talking about optimizing your YouTube profile. So if you do have a profile on YouTube and you want to consider how we can maybe showcase that in a better way, there are a lot of different settings and things that we can have a look at. So please, we'd love it if you could join us then. Check out the various social places, because we are all over the place. But again, if you head to either of our websites, I'm sure you'll be able to connect the dots on that one. So thank you, everybody. We really appreciate your company, and to those maybe watching the recording later on, that's wonderful as well. So Sam, it sounds like you can have a quiet time at home for next week or so. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can't get a lot done. So do some fun stuff. I've been doing a lot of focus on the Cute Avalanche YouTube channel. So we just passed 1,600 watch time hours. Let's see what we can do.
Nice. And again, I really look forward to sort of unpacking the YouTube portion of this, because I know there are a number of things that we can do in terms of making sure that our profile is a really great destination for people to join us and see us on that platform specifically. So again, thank you for your company, everybody. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Take care.